I'm Erin Byrne, and I'm the host of the Salon, and I'm the author of Wings, Gifts of Art, Life, and Travel in France. I'm the editor of Vignettes and Postcards from Paris and Vignettes and Postcards from Morocco, and the writer of the Storykeeper film, which is about occupied Paris. I've taught writing at Shakespeare and Company in Paris, at Book Passage in the Bay Area, and on deep travel trips around the world. I host the LitWings event series, which features writers, photographers, and filmmakers. And I also host salons like this one and in person. And I'm collaborating curator of the Creative Process Travel Writing and Photography exhibit. And the Creative Process exhibition is traveling this week to the UN Summit for Climate Change in Glasgow. So it travels to the world's leading universities and conferences. So I'm kind of excited about that. I have a hunch this is going to be an amazing hour. I'm so thrilled to introduce Matthew Felix. Matthew is a writer, program director, and host of the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast and a speaker. He also edits, publishes, and markets books for other authors, and he runs a Solificatio publication house. Matthew's own work extends a subtle invitation to delve deeper into ourselves and the world around us, whether by taking us to places we would not otherwise go, reminding us of our shared experiences through laughter, or awakening us to our inner voices. Matthew is the author of 3 Amazon best-selling books. With Open Arms, a travel collection that has topped Amazon, Africa, and Morocco categories. And I can't find my copy or I'd be holding it up.
You got to buy another one.
It is. It's a fabulous collection. Porcelain Travels, which is a humor collection that won Gold for Humor and the Reader's Favorite Awards and first prize for humor in the 2020 Soulmaking Keats Literary Competition. It's an absolutely fabulous book. My copy is the gallery. Otherwise, I would read my own blurb because I blurbed it. But it's so funny and insightful and adventurous. And I love Porcelain Travels. And his novel, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit today, A Voice Beyond Reason. It's the story of a young Spaniard's awakening to his intuition. Publishers Weekly Book Life Prize called it a highly crafted gem. Matthew has written about intuition in his short stories, Lightning Strikes Twice, and The Citron and the Pomegranate, which won the Bronze Solas Grand Prize for Travel Story of the Year. And those, I think people can find online. Is that right? Those two, they're awesome.
Yep.
Matthew is featured as both interviewee and interviewer in former Christian Science Monitor producer Lisa Taylor's online series, The Intuition Chronicles. It's a great video. You can find it, I think, on Matthew's website, but it's about how he exited the rat race to write and how to hear and trust your intuition, and also about ego and spirituality. It will cover some topics that we don't have time to get to today, so I highly recommend it. Matthew's current work in progress, Have Fun Falling, recounts and reflects on life-changing lessons about the creative process, overcoming doubt and fear, and opening to ever-present yet often discounted guidance for living lives that are true to ourselves. His blog is called Have Fun Falling. It's an inspirational blog that features essays, videos, and quotes about topics ranging from intuition to meditation, from synchronicity to dreaming, from lessons about the past to ruminations on the moment. It's really fabulous. He's got a blog there about him and me. It's the Rumi one, Rumi's Gift. Is that what it's called?
I think, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really fun to just peruse through his blog. Matthew and I have done many events together. He was featured in my LitWings series in Paris at La Caféothèque, and also in the Bay Area at Book Passage. We've done 3 Matthew Felix on airs together. The first one, I think we covered my Morocco book and my film and my trip to Spain and my filming in Spain and all kinds of different stuff. And then the second one we did, I interviewed him. We sort of turned the tables, and I interviewed him about his work. And then the third one we did in Paris about my Wings book, and it was really, really fun, even though I committed a faux pas at the end of it.
Total faux pas at the end.
Yeah, we did an event at Book Passage for our Morocco books together that was just absolutely packed and really fun. And then recently we did an event for the 5th anniversary of Wings at Sausalito Books by the Bay. That was absolutely the most magnificent, magnifique event. It was fabulous. And so I'm so thrilled to introduce Matthew Felix, and I can't wait for him to present his work and to interview him. Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Erin. That is unquestionably the most comprehensive introduction I have ever received. I think we got back to my birth. I mean, that was so
well, I didn't mention that in 6th grade you won a writers award and you went to a writers conference.
Which is actually true. Yeah, that's okay. So I guess there was some stuff that was left out. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Erin. Thank you for that really thoughtful, comprehensive introduction. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Leap for having us all. And thanks to all of you who have joined us this morning. Really excited to be here and appreciate that you have made time to be here as well. So what is our intuition? I mean, ostensibly, we're all here today because it's something that interests us, something that we think is important. But what is it really? In my novel, A Voice Beyond Reason, which Erin kindly just showed you, Victor, the mentor figure, he says, quote, "I suspect you could find as many answers as you could people to ask with regards to what intuition actually is." In Latin, the root of intuition is intuere, which means to look at. And then if we look in the dictionary, we find anything from knowing or sensing without the use of reason, to idea, to instinct, to sixth sense, and on and on and on. So lots of different ideas related to what intuition is. I think of intuition personally as non-rational guidance that I perceive inside myself, but that comes from somewhere greater. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's following our bones, it's going with our guts, and it's following our hearts. Now, I didn't used to be particularly good at any of those things. I was so just, I think most of us are socialized to just be on our heads and process and rationalize. And of course, reason has its place, but sometimes we get stuck in our heads. And I was definitely there. However, when I quit my job and decided to take 6 months off to explore my creativity, something changed. As the chaos of my day-to-day subsided, I started kind of hearing these voices, sort of metaphoric voices, but I started hearing these voices and I started getting these feelings in my gut about something I should or shouldn't do, or a decision I should or shouldn't take. And because the feeling was so novel, initially I dismissed them, but then they were also very persistent. So I started paying attention. And as I began paying attention to these feelings and these sort of voices, I started realizing that they were bringing me legitimate, worthwhile insight and guidance. So like I said, I started paying much more attention. And for example, it made sense. This is just a really simple example, but for example, I was walking around, I was in Spain at the time, and I was walking around and maybe I felt the gut urge that I need to go right, even though my map was saying to go straight. And then it turned out that made a lot of sense after the fact. Or I was hiking in the middle of nowhere during this period, and all of a sudden I was by myself. I just got this message: sit down right on the trail, right in the middle of nowhere. I had no desire to sit down. I wasn't thinking about sitting down. And this, I recount this in the novel. I fictionalize it. So I sit down in the middle of this trail, thinking I'm, crazy. And all of a sudden I see this spectacular show by this herd of wild mountain goats that was right there on this cliff without my knowing it, that I never would have seen if I hadn't listened to that voice. So again, just another example. A bigger example is that for years, my gut, my heart was telling me, you got to just be a writer. That's really what you're supposed to do. And of course, I resisted that voice because I didn't know how I was going to make it as a writer, especially in San Francisco. So I resisted. But when I finally acknowledged and acted on that intuitive guidance, then my entire life changed for the better. And to me, that's why paying attention to and acting on our intuition, that's why it matters. It's because it can change our lives for the better. I think that it can help us to live lives, hopefully, that are more true to ourselves, which for me is the goal. And that is what it's done to me. And that's why it's also one of my favorite things to talk about. So thank you again, Erin, for having me here today to talk about it. A couple other examples. Listening to my inner voice is the reason I became a podcaster from one instant to the next. I had no desire to be a podcaster. This opportunity presented itself. And I just knew right then and there in the moment, I'm supposed to do this. That might not seem like a big deal, but it has brought me great joy. And it's really doing the podcasting that I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years has really defined a lot of who I am and what I do during that time. And I never would have done that. It was just a gut impulse. I need to do that. Paying attention to and acting on my intuition has also increased my sense of and my faith in something greater, which to me is also very important to my health and happiness. And it's also, and that's sort of on a macro level, on a more micro level, on a day-to-day level, it's also simplified my decision-making. It's made things a little bit easier because again, rather than getting stuck in my head like I used to, of course I still do sometimes, but instead of getting stuck in my head, instead of over-processing, instead of falling into analysis paralysis, much more often I'm able to just go with my gut and make that decision. I don't have to belabor it. And that's because I'm much more aware of my intuition and my inner voice than I used to be. So the first step in this process, because I realized as I was going through this, I started to realize, wait, this is a process. My awakening to my intuition is actually unfolding in a sort of step-by-step process. The first step of that was recognizing my intuition, because like I said, to me at this point, it was novel. I hadn't really paid that much attention to it. So how do we recognize our intuition? Well, for me, the first thing is there has to be space for us to hear or rather for our intuition to make itself heard and felt. And for me, like I said, that happened because I took 6 months off from work. I was out of my day-to-day life. The chaos of my day-to-day life subsided. I was less distracted. I wasn't spinning. I was more relaxed. And so I was more open. Now, of course, we can't all take 6 months off and we can't all go to Spain, but fortunately, that's not required. But it is very hard to hear our inner voice or pay attention to what we're feeling if we're caught up in what's going on around us. In my novel, the protagonist, Pablo, describes his initial experience with his intuition as, quote, more than a voice, not quite a feeling. And so you'll hear me, I've already gone back and forth a lot between referring to it as a voice, but then also talking about what we feel. And I think intuition for me manifests in both ways. And so to recognize it, then we have to do 2 primary things. First off, we've got to be able to clear our mind and still our thoughts. Right? Because again, if we're processing, if our mind's a swirl, we can't really connect. That's the first thing. The second thing then is we have to get into our bodies, because again, so much of connecting with our intuition is about feeling it, feeling what's going on in our bodies. And if we're up here in our heads, we're not going to feel what's going on down there. There are lots of ways to do that. The most obvious one is meditation, right? Because just the simple act of focusing on our breathing, it stops the frenzy in our heads. And just by breathing in, it gets us into our bodies. Now, not everyone here, a lot of people are just going to sort of recoil at the idea of some sort of formal meditation practice because it just doesn't work for them. They can't bear the idea of sitting there for 10 minutes. And that's okay. But the point is, regardless of whether you do a formal meditation practice or you just become aware of your breathing, it's really about being that. It's really about the awareness of your breathing. We all know that if we're flustered, if we're sort of out of touch, what do we tell each other? Wait, stop, take a deep breath, right? And that's not just metaphoric. There are physiological reasons why stopping to take a deep breath slows us down up here and gets us into our bodies. So you don't have to meditate, although I do highly recommend it. Other ways of getting into our bodies: dance, exercise, breathing exercises. There are lots of other ways to do that, but breathing, again, is the most essential component. There's one other thing that is often overlooked, excuse me, I think, insofar as if we want to start to recognize that inner voice more clearly, and that's making a conscious choice to do so. Because I can create the space, I can clear my mind, clear my thoughts, and be in my body. But if I'm not paying attention when I start hearing the voice, if the voice is in the background, but I'm not paying attention, or if I'm not paying attention to the feelings that now I've created this space to pay attention to, but I'm not paying attention, it's like turning on the radio, but having it in the background and not listening to the music or the lyrics. It doesn't matter. So I think that often gets overlooked. You have to make a conscious choice to pay more attention. It doesn't just happen on its own. So once we've created the space and we're paying attention, then we quickly realize that there are these other voices in our head competing for our attention. So what other voices? So we've got our doubts and our fears on one side, and we've got our hopes and our desires on the other. So how do I know which voice is the voice of truth? Which voice is my intuition talking versus just I'm afraid to do that, or I really want to do that, but maybe my gut isn't actually telling me, that's maybe not the message I'm actually getting from my gut. Well, first, again, we create the space, we clear our heads, we get into our bodies. But then we simply have to ask ourselves, okay, we have to get honest with ourselves. Is my gut telling me I need to go to Spain? Or do I just really want to go to Spain and I'm making a nice justification for that? Or is my gut telling me not to do that thing because it's scary? Or is that thing that I'm afraid of actually the best thing that I possibly could do, and I'm just not ready to rise to the occasion? And so because our intuition doesn't have an emotional charge, it's not about our ego. And that's part of the beauty of it, right? Again, it is about truth. It's not about what we want or what we're afraid of. It's honesty. And so we have to get the ego out of the side. And a lack of emotional charge to that voice or to that feeling can be a sign that it's your intuition that's actually talking. And one thing that sort of a litmus test that I use is if I find myself arguing with that voice or with that feeling, then I know it's probably not my ego, because my ego is the one on the other side of the argument saying, no, I really should go to Spain, or God, don't do that, I'm so scared. And so if I'm arguing, that's probably, like I said, another litmus test that my intuition is talking. So again, I just want to underscore the other thing there then is that we do have to be able to be honest with ourselves and get the ego out of the way. And that takes honesty or discipline, that takes integrity, and it also takes practice, because it's hard to separate ourselves. It's hard to distinguish those voices. It takes practice. So now that I'm open, now that I'm trusting in this voice, I'm paying attention in this voice, and I'm distinguishing the voice of my intuition from the other voices that are competing for its attention, I have another decision to make. And this is whether to trust it or not. Do I trust this voice? Because I'm hearing it, but if I'm hearing it and not acting on it, then what does it matter? But if I don't trust it, then why would I listen to it? Never mind follow its guidance. But the problem and the challenge is that most of us are taught to disregard anything that we can't explain rationally, right? And we can't explain our intuition rationally. That's part of the beauty of it, but that's, again, also the challenge and the difficulty. So how can we trust it if we can't prove it? Well, for me, it's like with a new friend. You build up that trust over time, step by step. It doesn't just happen overnight. The friend earns your trust. And that's how it was with me with intuition. As I was starting to have these experiences when I was in Spain during those 6 months, each time I would give it a little more credence and I would realize, wait, that was legit. And so I built up trust in it over time. But it's not rational. And it often leads us to do things that don't make sense ahead of time and that we can't see how they're going to work out. So again, it comes back to needing to build up that trust over time. But 3 things get in the way of the trust. Actually, that's 2 things. 3 things get in the way of the trust, right? I was never good at math. First off, what ifs, but then also shoulds and have tos. But let's talk about what ifs. Because we've been socialized to try to make sense of everything, we even try to make sense of things when we don't have the information that we might need to do so. It's like trying to bake a cake when we don't have the ingredients. Reason is a wonderful tool, but we try to use it in the wrong circumstances. Again, when we don't have the facts. And so we try to reason, but we don't have the components with which to really do that. And so we try to rationalize the unknown. And that's when we get into what if, right? Well, I don't actually have a way to logically to deduce whatever this predicament might be. So let me just go through every single possible scenario I can think of, and then I'll have a false sense of control. And then that often leads us just to analysis paralysis, right? We end up going in circles. So there are two ways to approach that. One is don't go there, right? Just say, okay, I don't have the facts. I really can't reason my way through this. I'm going to go with my gut. I'm going to follow my heart. Or since oftentimes we fall into that rabbit hole because we're so accustomed to doing so, if we get stuck, again, so in the novel, Victor advises, he says, trust what you're feeling and take it one step at a time. So when we're stuck, we only need to do one step. And our intuition, if we just check in with ourselves, our intuition is going to tell us what that one step is. And then other doors open and we're able to get out of the predicament. Finding that one thing, though, requires being present. And this is the problem with the what ifs. The what ifs take us into the future, right? Into that hypothetical future that doesn't even exist. And so rather than being focused on where we are right now, which is where the solution is, we're stuck in the future. But to hear, trust, and engage with our intuition, we need to be present. And everything we talked about with regards to clearing our minds and getting into our bodies, that's what it does. It brings us into the present. If we're in our bodies and our minds are clear, that's where we are. And that's where our power is. And that comes back again to breathing. So let's talk about shoulds and have tos. So if what ifs take us into the future, shoulds and have tos throw us back into the past. So whether that's society or family or my own outdated thought patterns and beliefs, my gut might be telling me to do one thing, but I might not trust my gut because a voice from my past is telling me that I should do something else. I should do something instead. I can't study creative writing because I should get a degree that will get me a job. Or I might feel something in my heart, but I might not let myself believe it because society, my family, past conditioning tells me that I have to do something. I can't be a writer in San Francisco because I have to make a lot of money to be here. If we're not present, then the what ifs, the shoulds, and the have tos will come between us and being able to hear, act on, and follow our intuition. So there's a dark side to intuition. So let's talk about that. As we've already talked about, engaging with our intuition inherently entails stepping into the unknown. We don't necessarily know why we're being compelled to do something. We can't see how it would work out. It doesn't make sense, but we know that we're supposed to do it anyway. We feel it in our guts. And so we've talked about, we build up trust over time, and that's how we get to a point where we're able to believe in our intuition and act on it. That trust is built on we've seen time and time again that we were right to trust our intuition. So we have evidence that we weren't just crazy. It did make sense to go right, or it did make sense to sit on the trail. The tricky part, though, is we don't always get that validation. So maybe I feel compelled, I've got to call my friend. I've just got this weird feeling like something's up and it's even urgent. And I know I've got to call my friend, right? And so I call my friend, we have a nice conversation. He seems okay. I hang up and I'm sort of wondering, what was that about? Well, there could be two things. One is maybe he was really depressed and my call really raised his spirits and he just didn't let on to it. And so maybe I really was hearing my intuition and I did the right thing. Of course, maybe I was also just wrong. Maybe I was just delusional. That's also possible. But when we don't get that validation, does it mean that we were wrong to listen to our intuition? Maybe there are instances in which our intuition, our inner voices guide us to avoid a situation that therefore never happens. So maybe I'm walking down the street. Normally I would go right. My gut tells me to go straight. I go straight and I miss that anvil that falls from the building and would have squashed me like in one of those cartoons. But I don't know because my intuition guided me away from that situation and it never happened. And so again, that I was actually very, very right to listen to and act on my intuition in that case. So just because we don't know doesn't mean that we still shouldn't go with those feelings and listen to that voice. Now, I believe that our intuition is our connection to our highest truth. And that can take many forms, whether that's God, the universe, your inner self, some form of reasoning, however you define it. I believe that our intuition is our connection to that. And this is where we get back to the dark side of intuition, because what's true for me isn't necessarily what's easiest for me, unfortunately. And sometimes what's best for us is really, really difficult, right? Challenges, obstacles, lessons that we need to learn. And oftentimes our intuition, if we're following it, it is going to guide us to do things that are difficult and challenging. Reason did not tell me to quit my very well-paying career downtown to become a writer. There was absolutely nothing rational about it whatsoever. Furthermore, it has been really difficult on lots of different levels. There have been lots of challenges, emotionally, spiritually, financially. It has not been easy. And yet, I do not doubt for a second, I do not question for a second that decision to finally make that jump, which took me years, right, before I actually built up the courage to do that. But I knew that was what was right for me. I heard that voice unquestionably. I kept denying it. And so when I finally acted on it, again, my life just changed for the better. I have learned so much. I have grown so much. And my life is so much more interesting, quite frankly. And I'm not saying that everyone should go out and quit their jobs, but I'm saying that we should all listen to what we really genuinely feel, the pull that we really feel intuitively, and what our inner voice is saying would be best for us. For me, this is where trust in my intuition becomes faith in my intuition. Trust for me is feeling in the moment, okay, yeah, I'm supposed to call my friend. It's sort of more like I said, in the moment. Faith for me is further reaching. I have faith that becoming a writer is ultimately in my greater good. It's believing in where and how my intuition guides me in the bigger picture. So in closing, paying attention to and acting on my intuition has helped me to be more present, to be less stuck in my head and more aware of what's going on around me. It allows me to make easier and quicker decisions in my day-to-day. And it's led me to take life-changing risks that I wouldn't have taken otherwise, allowing me to live a life again that I feel is more true to myself. We're more open to and in touch with our intuition when we get out of our heads and into our bodies, and when we choose to pay attention to and trust in what we hear and feel. So I urge all of you to pay attention and to act on those feelings in your bones, to go with your guts, and to follow your hearts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. I'm so excited to kind of delve into this a little deeper. I wanted to remind people who arrived later to please turn your sound off. We get little dings when people join. All right. So intuition. I kind of think of it as an inner dividing rod. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your book, A Voice Beyond Reason, later. But in it, you say when Pablo kind of has his first intuitive experience, somehow he had known, except he hadn't, not exactly. And I love that because it signifies that sort of dance between our intuition and our mind and our body. And I wonder, I'm going to ask you in a minute to talk a little bit more about kind of this dance with the mind. I had a situation happen when I was looking at houses in Sausalito. And I was looking at this one place, and all of my signals and all of my intuition was telling me that this was the place. I was looking for a place to buy, and to buy this place, this condo. And then I had this word come in, and the word was "don't." Mm-hmm. But it was "don't" with an ellipsis after it. Okay. And I tend to be in my head a lot. So my mind like barks orders and does all this stuff. And I felt like I had sort of quieted that. But I intuited this "don't ... And in my experience of the word "don't," it's always paired with the word "think." And I have a piece in my Wings book it's called "Don't Think," and it's this message from Henri Cartier-Bresson. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, don't think. And so I had to do this kind of a loose questioning so that my mind wouldn't jump in and say, don't buy the place. If it had been don't period, I might have thought it was that. But I had to do this sort of delicate dance between my brain and my intuition. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Because first of all, even though I'm saying we should be paying more attention to our intuition, and it's been important for me to do that and to not be so stuck in my head, I'm not saying that reason doesn't have a very legitimate place, right? I'm not going to use my intuition to design a microchip or to do my budget, or, I mean, I think they both have, places and relevance in different situations.
You probably shouldn't use it to decide how you deal with a pandemic either.
Maybe not how you deal with a pandemic either.
Maybe not.
Yes, maybe not. And so it is a dance. And so I think that once you're kind of in touch with both and comfortable with both, then hopefully you realize, like, you do hear the voice, you do feel the feeling, and when, okay, wait, this is an instance in which I need to kind of pay attention to that side of that kind of guidance, the intuitive guidance versus just reasoning it out. And I think another time when which I just talked about, is when to stop dancing is when you're going in circles, because a lot of times we're just going in circles, the analysis paralysis. And for me, that's always a sign, okay, I just have to stop and I've got to check in with what this other source of guidance that can help me stop the dance.
Right. So, it's like, so I think maybe what you're saying is something like the act of decoding your intuition is different every time. Is that what you're saying? Like
the act of decoding my intuition.
Yeah.
No.
Like, what does this mean?
Well, I don't think you decode your intuition. I think you're either, like, if we go back to the radio metaphor that I just used, I think you're either paying attention to it or you're not. And so I think it's just a question of, again, being present both in your mind and your body, so that when the messages are coming, then you can receive them.
Right. I think of kind of my intuition as my inner orchestra, because it's in my body, as you say, but it's in all these different places, right? And so it's all like, suddenly the orchestra plays this and you have this message. Can the orchestra get out of tune? Do you think? Like,
I think it gets out of tune if you think you're hearing the orchestra, but you're hearing something else.
Right.
I
And
think that
also, I'm sorry. I'm just going to give you some time to riff on this, but
okay.
I wanted to also see if you could mention this concept. It's of your body knowing, right? Like, your body keeps the score, and we've talked about this a lot, and you sound like you're just ultra aware of your body and what you let, as you said, it's inside your body and you focus inside your body. So maybe just talk more about that.
Well, I don't know that I'm ultra aware, but I would love to be ultra aware. Wouldn't that be nice? But I think, again, for me, the reason this became just of such interest to me was because I was so not aware. And all of a sudden I became aware kind of almost overnight. And so that's why it got my attention. Right. So I don't know, what was the question again, besides being ultra aware?
Well, I just wanted you to talk about this whole idea of the body keeps the score, and, how your body intuitively weighs in.
I think some of the metaphors are fairly literal, like going with our gut. I mean, everybody knows what it feels like to get a burning sensation in the gut, right? For example, I mean, that's the easiest example. Sometimes these metaphors are pretty literal.
Yes.
So for me, again, it's not a hypothetical thing. It's, I feel it in my bones. I get tense, or I remember, actually, in that story that you mentioned, the Rumi story, where you play a part, where I was looking for a book for you, I walked past this store that I had no intention of going, and I felt a physical pull back to the door, right? So it's very literal. It's not just metaphoric. And the body does chime in. And I do like what you just said also about how it can chime in different ways and in different parts of your body. Maybe it's your gut, like, if you're afraid, That's often where I'll feel it in my gut.
Right.
And I think also, though, I think it's really good to point out something that we haven't necessarily said, which is that I think that we all experience this differently, right?
Yes.
For some people, it is more of a voice. Some people hear
Mhm.
literal voices. For
Right.
some people, it is more physical. For some people, so I think it's also a very individual experience, even though the phenomena, we all experience it in some degree or other, depending on how open and in tune we are.
Okay, so you clear your mind,
Mhm.
you go into your body. Do you consult your intuition kind of like a crystal ball?
Well, I don't think it's magical. So, I mean, I think that, so I do, so I'm not sure what you mean by that. So let me approach it from a couple ways. So
I
first
mean,
off, I
I
would
think
say,
I'm asking it as relates to the future, right? Like the crystal ball, like here you are now following your intuition.
I don't really, I think I'm less concerned again about the future. Again, I think that really for me, the intuition is more about, like, I don't try to go into my intuition and say, okay, where am I going to be in 5 years, or, or what's happening in 6 months. I'm sure there are people who do, but for me, it's really more about in the moment, what's right in the moment. What am I missing? What do I need to know in the moment for whatever? And the moment might be a life-changing decision, like I mentioned. So the moment might have far-reaching consequences and ramifications, but I'm not looking ahead to see, where am I going to be or what am I going to do? So in that sense, it's not a crystal ball. But two things along those lines, though. One is I do deliberately consult it, like you might a crystal ball. Like if I realize I need insight, I need guidance, and this is one of the things that happens in my new book, there are a couple of instances where I just got really frustrated in the new book, and I just stopped and I took a deep breath and I asked the question and I got the answer, right? So I do think you can consult it with that sort of, intention. But again, that's less about the future. And then the other thing, though, that you probably weren't getting at, but that you made me think that I was thinking about before today, is one of the reasons that this does interest me, and that synchronicity and dreams interest as well, which it's all related, is that it is a reminder that there is magic and that life is magical, as whatever as that might sound. So that's one of the reasons that it is also so fascinating to me. But
Right.
anyway.
That leads perfectly into my next topic, which is this idea of synchronicity, of like following your intuition and then bang, 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 things fall into place. The example that I was thinking of is I was in Paris during COVID and I had decided I would just stay there. And I spent this whole day getting groceries, and my apartment guys were going to move me to this really fancy apartment and all this stuff. So I had really decided I thought it was just going to be a couple months, but I was going to stay there.
Right.
And I woke up and I just knew I was like, you got to get out of there. And I woke up, went to my computer, got a really expensive ticket without waiting for Delta to give me a different ticket, which was illogical. Right. And then like a couple hours later, my apartment guys called and they said, oh, you got to get out of here. Macron's going to shut down this city. We don't even think you can get to the airport, blah, 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 blah. I was like, oh, that's weird. And I was basically essentially on the last plane out of there. And so it was like I followed my intuition. It was a little bit illogical. And then bang, 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 bang. Kind of signs from the universe. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because again, to me, like I said, intuition is connecting with that greater truth, however you define that, like I said. And so when we're connected, when we're open, when we're plugged in, which again is a choice, when we choose to plug in, then I think we plug in to again, that greater energy, the universe, again, whatever you want to call it. And so when you're plugged in, then things start to fall into place. And if I'm meditating, if I'm in nature, if I'm being creative, if I'm working out, like if I'm doing all the things I need to do to take care of myself physically, spiritually, and emotionally, I notice such a difference in the number of synchronicities. I mean, I just do. And my dreams are so much more active, and I am more intuitive if I'm making the effort to do that. And when I get caught up in my day-to-day and I'm overwhelmed by work, there's so much less of that going on. And I don't believe it's coincidence. I believe it's because we choose whether to connect or not. And when we're connected, things fall into place in often miraculous ways. And then synchronicity for me is oftentimes a reminder you're plugged in. Keep
Right,
doing what you're doing, right? To something greater.
Okay, so I'm hoping to squeeze in 2 more questions before we have our little Q&A.
Okay.
The first one is, I think that I've always felt like, and I suppose I haven't always felt like this, I've learned this, that if I don't follow my intuition, it leads to depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like lying down on my own path is better than skipping down an inauthentic one. And I love how you said, I'm not going to remember exactly how you said it, but it was like, maybe it was in your blog, how you describe it, or where, oh, here it is. Living lives that are true to ourselves. Like, so I wonder what you think about that.
About
like not following your intuition. Like, I went for a lot of years not following it in all areas of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it it wore me down. It is a little bit like a barking dog if you ignore it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I think to ignore it is to do so at our own peril, right? I mean, I wish that I had listened to, I mean, you know, hindsight's 2020, so I don't beat myself up over it, but I wish I'd made the jump, for example, to becoming a writer earlier. My voice, the voice of my intuition was telling me that for years, and I didn't have the courage and the trust to actually do it. And I wasn't happy. I mean, I think
it takes a lot of energy to ignore our inner voices. And I don't know if we talk about that enough, but okay, so I do want to have time to ask you about your current work in progress, which is a book. It's essentially a memoir of a leaper into the void, right? Like, it's a memoir of following your intuition, but it's not really have fun following, because the following is the hard part sometimes. It often, the falling comes after you follow, right? Like, so I wonder if you can, like, I feel like once you follow your intuition, then you freely fall into your own life, and that's the fun part. But maybe you can just talk about the new work, and how that title sort of fits in with it.
So the title came, so thank you for asking. The title Have Fun Falling came from a dream. And so this new book is part my struggles with the creative process, because I was finishing my novel. And then it's also part how dreams, synchronicity, and intuition have influenced my life in a very real way. And the title Have Fun Falling, like I said, it comes directly from a dream that I had, a really powerful dream where I was standing on this is the short version of the dream. I'm standing on a cliff in the Mediterranean. I know I'm supposed to jump, but it's a really, really far fall. I'm afraid to jump. And then I hear this voice that says jump, which I already knew I was supposed to do. But then it adds have fun falling. And so in that moment, I realized, because so often we focus just on, should I take the risk? Do I have the courage to take the risk? Which is a very, very hard part. But in this dream, I realized something I hadn't necessarily realized prior to that, which was that it's once you've thrown yourself into the unknown and you don't know where you're going to land, whether it's metaphorically or literally, what I was being told is enjoy that part before you get to what you think is your destination. And so then that becomes a theme throughout the book, because I am grappling with my novel. I'm grappling with some other stuff in my life, and I don't have that certainty. And so the challenge largely is to get comfortable with that uncertainty, to trust that you're taken care of as long as you're going with your gut and following the guidance that you're getting, that it does work out. And hopefully it works out in ways, again, that are true to yourself. That's kind of the basic insofar as the title and the premise.
Right. And it is essentially like, it's sort of like a guide. It becomes a guide on how to follow your intuition. So thank you for explaining that. Okay, we do have time for some questions. So if you have a question, please just unmute yourself and chime right in.
Matthew, it sounds to me, I love that last part about have fun falling. And it sounds to me like you're talking about happiness. That you may get greater happiness from following your own path, even if you're falling, or even in certain uncertainty. I don't know, that thought just whizzed in from nowhere. I thought
that intuitive insight.
It just whizzed in from nowhere.
But I think you're right. I think the point is to trust in the process, and trust even when you don't know, because hopefully you're going towards, again, truth, and hopefully that truth entails happiness. I mean, happiness is the goal, right? And I think that we're happier when we're doing what we love and we're living lives that are true to ourselves. And so the trick is sometimes there are those transition periods where we don't see how we're going to get there. And so what that dream was telling me was, you're headed in the right direction, but trust in that. Trust that you're heading in the right direction. You're heading towards a life that's more true to yourself, towards happiness, even if you don't have all the pieces and you can't necessarily see at this stage of the game how you're going to get there. So yeah, it's largely about happiness. Absolutely. Thank you.
I have a question about your inner critic. How do you silence the inner critic and really start listening to, I guess, your intuition more genuinely?
Well, I think first of all, again, you recognize it, right? You recognize, wait a second, this isn't the voice of truth. This is my old thought pattern. This is something that was ingrained in me when I was a kid, or this is something that I've because I'm scared, I'm not lacking confidence, whatever the source might be, you recognize it as such. And once you recognize it as such, then you can start to say, hey, wait a second, I know you, and I don't believe you. And be quiet, because there's somebody else I want to listen to who actually has much more legitimate, truthful insight and guidance, and I want to focus on that. And then, I mean, we always need to sort of get to the root. Like, I mean, I would also dialogue with my inner critic. Okay, where is this coming from? Why am I beating myself up? Why don't I think I'm good enough? Why don't I think this writing's good enough? And be gentle with yourself and just say, okay, you know what? This inner critic, maybe it served a purpose earlier, maybe it never did, but I don't need it anymore. I recognize it as such. And I'm going to kind of ask you to please excuse yourself, because I'm ready to move on to a different phase of my life where I'm not constantly having to deal with that. And then shift your focus away from that critic, which you can silence when you realize that's what it is. And this is where meditation helps, because if I'm meditating, then, and it's hard at first, right? But you start to be aware of your thoughts, and you start to be able to identify, wait, that's not legit. That's my fear talking. I can dismiss that voice. And so that's why for me, meditation and focusing on the breathing is really essential, because you can start to identify those voices that are not necessarily what you want to be listening to and paying attention to.
What a great question. All right, we have time for one more question at least.
Hi.
Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you, Erin. Matt, your name is Matthew?
It is. Your name's Janet.
Yeah. So you did a lot. You went into writing, and then you did quite a lot of nonfiction, is from what I heard. What led you, and was it intuitive to go into fiction? And did your character, your Pablo, did that come to you through some intuitive process? Or I would just like to know more about your creative process there.
Yeah. So thank you for asking. So actually it was the other way around. So I started writing fiction. A Voice Beyond Reason, the novel was actually my first writing project. And that writing project came out of what was happening when I started waking up to my intuition and realizing it was a process, and being fascinated by the process and these voices and these feelings and all the stuff we just got done talking about. That led to the book. Now, I knew when I went to Spain for those 6 months, like I said, I went to explore my creativity. So it wasn't surprising that I ended up writing, but when I went over there, I didn't know what I was going to write. And so that's how that book came to be. Well, while I was in Spain, I went to Morocco once. And then while I was finishing the book a couple of years later, I went to Morocco a second time, and I had lots of experiences there, some funny, some horrible. And I decided to independently publish my novel. And I thought, well, before I do this, I need to know how to do that, what the process is for publishing. And so I thought, well, I have all these Morocco stories, so why don't I publish these first to teach myself everything A to Z about publishing, from, you know, formatting and designing and publishing itself to the marketing. And then I'll apply all those lessons to the novel. Well, I didn't realize that the Morocco book would find an audience so quickly, which was obviously very exciting. And then the Porcelain Travels, again, that was just when I was writing, it was more sort of an accident. I wasn't actually going to publish those stories. I didn't want to become known as the bathroom guy. And, but
Our
I
time's
shared,
our time's almost up. So
yeah, but I shared a few of those stories and with friends and family. And 10 years later, they were still asking me, when are you going to publish your bathroom book? And so I finally thought, okay, again, it comes back to ego. I have to get my ego out of the way. Those stories obviously resonated. And so that's how Porcelain Travels came to be.
and I think there's more. I think, have you blogged about this? If you haven't, you should.
I'm going to find you now.
Okay, you
Okay,
definitely
please come
should.
find me. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna whip through the last few minutes because I want to give Matthew the last word. So Matthew, I'll call on you again. I
Okay.
just want to let everybody know the video with Jeff Greenwald is on my website. It's on the media page, and that's exactly where I'll put the video of Matthew's talk here. And Salon number 3 is going to be October 26th at 11.
Number 4.
Change it to an hour. I think that's a better time. Writing Inspiration in Paris. So it's going to be Martin Rame, Jane Weston, and Philip Murray Lawson are 3 longtime participants of the evening writing workshop at Shakespeare and Company Paris. Anna Pook taught the workshop for a long time, and I just sort of swooped in the fall of 2011 and taught for a long stint. And then I would, every time I was in Paris, I would come and teach, and we put together an anthology of work from Shakespeare and Company. It's coming up on its 3rd edition this spring. Martin, Jane, and Philip will be sharing how they continue to support each other in this amazing writing group, and how they've carved out their own individual writing niches in Paris, in that city of literary light, and how they keep each other inspired. So it's going to be really fun. I had hoped to be there with them, but I'm going to have to do it long distance. Salon number 4 will be November 30th with Ernest White II, producer and star of the Fly Brother television series. So Matthew, you have really ignited our intuition and helped us shine kind of a spotlight on our paths. Merci beaucoup. And I'm going to give you the last 2 minutes to tell us about anything else we missed.
The last 2 minutes. I didn't know. I didn't know that I had to think of something of the last 2 minutes. So
maybe talk, if you're lacking anything to talk about, you could talk about, I really had a lot of thoughts about how the Spanish culture, like the Spanish culture, just like intuition is such a heavy theme in it, right? Like in the flamenco, and Pablos sings the Cante Hondo, and you actually sang too in your past.
I do.
But like the way that they feel that, I loved that.
Well, yeah, and actually there's another part there that this, not what you're alluding to, but that figures prominently in the book, is the tradition of Sufism in the south of Spain.
Yeah.
And intuition is very central to Sufism, and which was, again, had a very big presence way back when in southern Spain as well. So that's another theme that kind of goes throughout the novel that's related to what you're talking about as far as the connection to Spain.
Yes, and I highly recommend this. I mean, it is really basically kind of the hero's journey of an intuition follower, and he has these characters who encourage him. Victor, this kind of mysterious guy, and then, you know, other characters who think he's out of his mind, or, you know, like, so it's probably going to be a really nice pairing with Have Fun Falling. It's like here's the fiction version, and here's the very deep inside scoop of the real memoir of how it is to follow your intuition. So
And branching a lot into the dreams and the synchronicity. There's a
yes,
lot.
that
So
was
it
one of
kind
my questions. I didn't have time to, maybe we've got like maybe a minute, maybe you can just mention dreams. That was one of my other questions.
Yeah, so I mean, intuition's kind of where I started paying attention to this sort of stuff. But then as I did, like we talked about, when you are kind of paying attention, then you start to get more connected. And so, I mean, my dream life, there was just this really short version. I mean, I woke up one time and I remembered 14 dreams. So I have a very active, active dream life. For a while, I was writing my dream. I could spend an hour and a half writing down my dreams from the night before, which was actually kind of over the top, and it was too much, quite frankly. But it was also really, really fascinating. And so, what one of the big things, like I said, the new book starts off with the dream and the insight and the courage that dream gives me, because I think back to that dream later on in the book, and it helps me to kind of keep going when I'm not so sure. So dreams are a big part of this new book. And then also there's some just insane synchronicities
yeah,
that
so
happen.
awesome. It's going to be so great.
And
so,
that's what inspired me to write the new book, is some of those experiences.
Okay, well, Matthew, thank you so much. And
Thank you,
thanks
Erin.
to everybody for coming, and have yourselves a great week.
Thank you.